There we go. Fantastic. So we've got a good number of people on. So thank you again for taking the time to join us this morning. Um, so today's discussion is going to be from zero to science without worrying about infrastructure. So I think regardless of if you come from bioinformatics or IT infrastructure or just the science side, I think today's discussion will be really compelling. And I'm confident that you'll gain some new perspectives that you can apply back to your organization. So really looking forward to it. Our hour is packed, so I do want to quickly get to some of the questions we have for the panel team. I'll briefly just do a real brief introduction and then allow them, in kind of the context of answering some questions to provide some additional background. Just a couple quick housekeeping items on my side. So we do have our offer for that the Biotech Guru Goat T-shirt. We'll be sending that out after the invite. So based on everybody who attended, as long as you have a business email address, you are eligible for the T-shirt, and we'll send you the link. Just a quick form to be able to provide your sizing info, and then we'll connect with you to ship. So that'll be happening after the event. Just want to encourage everybody to continue to check us out on LinkedIn. LinkedIn for PTP is probably the best format for you to know upcoming events, videos that we post, blogs that have things going on like this one, and things that we're doing with our other partners that are just kind of helping shape innovation in the cloud, in particularly for life sciences. We do have another event upcoming in March on the 16th. Check that out on our website. Really more around the governance and management side of the cloud. So our partners, our cloud management platform partners, CloudCheckr and Spot, really providing visibility and automating the RI process, taking some of the complexity out of it, and making sure while you're doing these great things from enabling science in the cloud, that we're also helping you keep your CFO happy and providing kind of the guardrails and the governance for ensuring that you're doing that cost effectively. And with that, I think that's enough for me. So I've got a number of questions that we've laid out today to our panelists. Jim Davis with us from AWS, Aneesh from Quilt, and then Aaron, our senior cloud architect from PTP. And so we're just going to jump right into it. Like I said, we've got a great number of attendees. So last thing I'll just say before we kick off the first question is if you've got any questions, we've got a lot to cover, so this probably won't be as much of a Q&A, but if there's any specific questions you want to drop in the Q&A, I'll keep an eye out for them. Things that are relevant to this discussion, I'll certainly bring up and maybe kind of bounce off the team. If they're not, but they're still important questions, we'll obviously on the PTP side can work offline with our partners and reach out to you afterwards. So I will keep an eye on things like that as well. So let's get going. So Jim, I think we'll start with you today. And, I think probably just to kind of tee things up, what do you see as the biggest points of friction for biotech companies as they're getting started with AWS?
Yeah. Hi, Gary. Thanks for inviting me onto the panel, and thanks for that question. I work with our life science customers, startup customers here at AWS, specifically focused on biotech and specifically focused on those customers that are just getting started with AWS and then scaling. And so I see quite a few points of friction, but I think, the biggest one of all is just what you said in the question, right? It's just actually getting started. These startup biotech companies, you have scientists that are really good at science, right? Computational folks that are really good at bioinformatics. But when it comes to things like operations, security, reliability, everything that we at AWS have within our well-architected pillars, I would say most of the folks that I come across really aren't that strong at, right? And so as I'm working with our customers, I'm really looking to help solve for this by removing undifferentiated heavy lift, right? And we try to do that really in two different ways here at AWS. The first is we've developed several pre-built, pre-competitive solutions that can help biotech companies get started with AWS right out of the box. In fact, we call it the biotech blueprint, or a biotech in a box, right? Because it's really providing you this well-architected environment, right, that's optimized for preclinical biotech companies that are just getting started, meeting all those different things from the well-architected framework, right? Like operational excellence, right? Like security, like resiliency. And then we have other solutions. And when I say solutions, I'm saying solutions with a capital S. These things are pre-built, right? They're able to be installed immediately with a push of a button that can add on to the biotech blueprint, right? Things like data lake as code, right? That allows you to ingest and register open source data sets, things like our genomics workflow solutions for secondary analysis, right? It's really designed to get you from 0 to 60 as fast as possible. Actually, I guess for this webinar, I should say 0 to science as fast as possible. And so, you know, these solutions are there, right? They're available, they're maintained by AWS, right? And really there to be able to get going fast and remove some of that friction. I would say the second way that we're really consulting with our customers to get going fast and to really kind of eliminate that friction is to engage with our partner network, right? With AWS Partner Network. And whether that's a consulting partner like PTP to help implement some of these solutions, right? And to maintain them and to optimize them and to continue to really jumpstart, right? The ability to get going on AWS, or technology partners like Quilt that extends on these solutions. We're really consulting with our customers to take advantage of that partner network early, right? And I think when you put all of those things together, right, AWS solutions, our consulting partners, and then our technology partners, we really are jump starting that speed to science.
Fantastic. Yeah, and there was, Jim, there was a question that I thought was really relevant while you were talking, and that was just, hey, where does one find some of these pre-built solutions? And I know there's a lot of places out there. We've got a life sciences page for AWS, you've got a partner community, but maybe just share that if you could.
Yeah, I would say anything with AWS is super Google friendly, right? If you Google AWS Life Science Solutions, you're going to find things. If you Google Biotech Blueprint AWS, you're going to find it. What I'll do is, as we continue to go through, I'll find a link and I'll post it in the chat as well.
Awesome. Appreciate it. Okay. So from there, why don't we shift gears and we're going to go to Aaron, and Aaron, like kind of like Jim did, if you would just want to just real quick background before you answer the question, but let me start with you with maybe just some key imperatives for early stage life sciences companies when getting started working with AWS.
Great, thanks, Gary. So Aaron Jeskey, Senior Cloud Architect here at PTP. My role is to meet with all of our new customers in a pre-sales engineering role, and help find partners like Quilt to help drive towards towards that 0 to science initiative that we're talking about here today. As for what helps, what are some of the imperative focus, or what are some of the things you need to focus on as you're entering into this life sciences world in the cloud? We quite often are dealing with organizations that come to us and we get an email from an AOL email address. I'm not kidding. We've literally had customers come in, I don't have a domain, I barely use email, I've just left an institution, I've got some money, I want to get started, but I had that institution that backed me up, that helped build all that infrastructure and help support me as I was going through and doing my research. Now I'm on my own. How do I go forward with this? And what are some of the things I absolutely need to focus on? So lowering the bar of entry for your team is by far the most important thing that we here at Peak, or we have an organization that our team, we call the Peak Plus Operations Center. They help the scientists get out there as easily and as quickly as possible. So Amazon is a little daunting when you start to look at it from day one. There's 1,500 different features that you can go and deploy. So what we try to do is focus on the things that are absolutely core to conducting your science, getting that data from the bench and into Amazon as smoothly as we possibly can, and in a way that once it's in Amazon, you can find the right way to start acting on that data. So we have focused on a lot of trying to get that bench data out, moving it through a platform called Storage Gateway, which is all all services provided by Amazon. So it's not like you're having to go out and make this large investment in software licensing or anything like that. This is all pay as you go type infrastructure. So you turn it down and turn it up as much as you need it. Get that data into that storage gateway, and as Jim pointed out, getting it to that data lake, and so that you can start to build on those, go to the marketplace, start to find those tools and deploy them to start taking action on your data, either be with simple business intelligence software or HPC compute platform.
Can you maybe just, Aaron, just elaborate a little bit just from a foundational, like what we can do around a well-architected perspective, and then just kind of the fundamental building blocks of kind of how we see building that environment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have an offering in the marketplace. So it's trying to lower that bar of entry as quick as low as we can get it to get you to zero to science. So in our marketplace offering is everything from once you have an account, deploying a well-architected framework, using tools like Control Tower to help you adhere to your HIPAA or GXP standards that you're having to comply to as you're going through your development lifecycle, introducing all the ability for secure communication, audit ability, and being able to really take on the business side of operations, the security concerns, the audit, and the access to your environment. So we like to deploy Control Tower, use the multi-account structure strategy that is all part of that Amazon well-architected framework that adheres to that biotech blueprint that Jim mentioned earlier. So we, with that offering from the marketplace, you can get your entire environment to the point where, if you choose to partner with Quilt, we can also help you out with that. We are partnered with Quilt to help deploy the application for them. We don't do the science, as Jim pointed out. We're not here to conduct science for you. We don't want to tell you that that's where other folks are the experts. We're here to be the infrastructure experts for you.
Yeah, that's great. And so much of that is easier to build the right way early in the stages before things get dynamic. And so, obviously part of what we're trying to do there is just kind of build a foundation for you to be able to grow and scale quickly, as so many of these life sciences organizations are. So appreciate that, Aaron. So to Aneesh, and this is where I think we'll start to roll up our sleeves and get into some detail, but what do you see as the most important aspects of data management for biotechs to get right from the start?
There are a couple. So Aneesh, I'm the CTO here at Quilt Data, and I really spend my days helping teams in healthcare and life sciences to go faster, right? That is the urgency. Everybody wants to get those IND filings in, but the science is just bloody hard. And the issue is, if you start with just raw infrastructure, now you kind of have two problems, right? Because the cells are not behaving, they're not doing the set of things that you want them to do, and now you have all these infrastructure pieces to think about. So a couple, I think the number one functional requirement that teams should design their data lake systems, their data collection systems, is really around designing data for reuse. And that word reuse implies not only that you'll have durability of that data over time, but it implies usability. And one of the things I tell my customers all the time is that it's very difficult to build the dam after the flood. And if you think about how your data volumes are going to grow as you scale headcount, as you start running more and more experiments, you are literally under a flood. You're under some geometric growth of data. And your headcount at best is going to grow kind of linearly. So I think one of the first biggest thing that we teach is that blob storage is your friend. And different clouds are kind of good at different things, but S3 is really number one with a bullet as the core of the data lake piece. So the first thing is designing around blob storage. Now, the second problem that this introduces, or the first challenge you're going to hit once you have S3 is kind of this low-level storage primitive. And to this theme of data reuse and usability, you now need to worry about how are the business users in your organization, right? So remember, there's kind of a split in every organization. You've got your developers and your non-developers. So the bench scientists, the business users, the chief science officer, the chief executive officer, the team leads, how are they going to get into the data? And that's really where we come in on the application side of things, is really making S3 as accessible and reusable as possible. So the number one thing I think is designing around blob storage as the core. I think number two is planning for use and reuse of that data. And then the third one, which I want to talk about, is breaking out of the tyranny of files and folders. So we've all seen this before, and this is a big function of this divide that we have in the industry of skill sets. It's divide of skill sets, right? So bench scientists are going to be comfortable with things like Box and Dropbox. Data engineers, data scientists are going to be comfortable with things like S3, and you get this fragmentation. And what I call the tyranny of files and folders is like you may have an experiment in a folder, but what happens to that folder over time? First of all, there's no one single folder structure that everybody in the organization is going to be able to use to find that data. So you end up copying data. The second thing we've all seen this is file names start getting longer and longer and longer, and they may even break the file character limits of the NAS, and metadata starts to go into the files. So my third big tip I'm going to give the teams, and we've done a lot of this, is available in the open source, I'll post the link, is having a single abstraction for a data set abstraction. Because files have two problems. They can be moved and they tend to get dusty and untrustworthy over time. When you make a decision in a clinical setting or in a life sciences setting, you need a single abstraction that encompasses your data, your metadata, your charts, your documentation, and your lineage. Right? So it's really about having an abstraction that's one level above files that represents data sets. And so anyway, those are my three tips. I don't want to go on and on and on. There's a whole science to this, but we got to keep it simple. Use blob storage, design for reuse, and have a data set abstraction.
Okay, I was taking fast and furious notes. I think I got all that. Would love to be able to try to come back at the end and then just kind of reiterate some of those points, because I think those were really great and critical, and certainly resonated with me. So great start there. So let's go back to Jim. So I mean, you're talking to tons of customers on a daily basis, obviously, in the space that you're in life sciences for AWS. So what are you hearing from customers that are the most common pain points to data management as they start to scale?
Yeah, no, thanks for that question, Gary. And Aneesh, I really liked the analogy that you gave, that you can't build the dam after the flood, right? Because it's really, that's part of the biggest pain point that I see is that you're going back and trying to re-architect, right, for your data management rather than starting early, right, in how you're looking at it. And I think it's really interesting. We're seeing probably in our second or third or maybe even fourth generation now of cloud native biotech companies, and the earlier companies now are just so much more sophisticated than you would have saw maybe 2 or 3 years ago. And I think that wouldn't have been possible, right, if you weren't learning from mistakes, right? If you weren't seeing the pain points from these more mature companies and really looking to address it early. You know, one of my customers, they're not that far into their journey. They're still pre-IPO, but they're scaling super fast, right? The number of samples that they have, it's growing exponentially, and that means the number of samples that they're running through their data pipelines is growing exponentially as well. And what they've told me is that and when I say we here, I mean AWS, we've done such a great job in making data processing efficient with tools like AWS Batch and, you know, incorporating that with orchestration engines like Nextflow, that the result is that there's just so much data being processed, right? And then so much data being generated outside of just the raw data. And then that data that comes out of secondary analysis, right? They're being further analyzed and new data sets are being composed off of them. And so you can kind of get a sense of the buildup, what I'm getting at here, right? It's a lot of data. And, you know, one of the things that I've seen across my customer set is that, you know, big problems, they're masked by small teams, right? And you know, one of the biggest problems that I see is the fact that data gets messy fast, right? It just gets all over the place. And like Aneesh was saying, people try to organize this with S3 naming conventions or with different version numbers in their files. But the fact of the matter is it's just not scalable. And on top of all of this, I mean, I think Aneesh mentioned, you know, Box and Dropbox. But I see a lot of times scientists, you know, they're storing data locally. They're storing it on their laptop, right? And they're not bringing it back to the cloud. And so now you have versions that are just everywhere. And I think a small team, it's easier to get away with this, right? Because you are small, you know where all your skeletons are buried, right? And you can communicate with one another really easily. But as your team continues to grow, right? And if you wait until it's a big team, you know, the data is just going to be everywhere and it's really hard to manage. And then, you know, linking those data across different repos like LIMS systems or ELNs, file shares, that's going to be hard. Reproducing the experiments that you've done with that data, it's going to be extremely hard because you don't even know where it is, right? Or what version was used in that experiment. And then, finding insights in that data, that's going to be almost impossible because it is just everywhere and no one's going to be able to use it. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so excited to join this webinar and this panel with you all today, is because, this is why I bring Quilt into almost every one of my conversations with my customers, whether it's early stage, late stage, whatever stage, no matter where you are in your life cycle, you can benefit from better data management, right? And the early stage companies, I think they're benefiting probably the most right now because they can benefit from not only a better data management system, but the shared knowledge that it's going to get a lot worse, right? If you don't put something in place right now. And, I think if you can solve for it early, if you can use consulting partners like PTP to help you implement it and help you solve for it, you're going to be in a much better place. That's not to say that mature companies can't go back. It's just going to be a little harder, right? It's because they have that muscle memory of bad practice already in place. But it's the same concept. If you don't refactor it now, right? If you don't change your process now, it's going to be even harder as you go on. So I guess, very simply, Gary, the biggest pain point, I think, data builds up, it gets messy, and folks just don't realize it until it's too late.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And I mean, from my experience, just kind of watching, the companies that we work with, we see the 5 to 10 person, that's the early stage. Hey, we've got an idea and we've got a few bucks, to kind of get started. And I think to your point, this is when, hey, data management is really easy. There's not that much of it. You're in some shared lab space, whatever. You've got a scientist, a few people, and then you kind of jump to that 50 to 75. And then from there, it's like that jump up to 200 plus people. And I think, as you said, it's, you can probably get your arms around it when you're 5 to 10 people, but it very quickly, once you get to that next step of 50 to 75 people, I can only imagine where the complexity and the mess gets, amplified.
Yeah, I think that, the point that Jim brought up there too, and something that Aneesh was talking about, the muscle memory of how you've been doing things for so long, just retraining yourself for how to go and serve up your data. But tools like Quilt really lower that bar for you too, because there's just so much programmatic aspect of that data ingestion. There's yes, you still have to worry about how you're structuring data once it's written. But bringing in tools like this really helps make that ingestion easier. It's never easy because, like Jim, you're saying, people bringing on their laptops. Can't tell you how many scientists hand us like a shoebox full of USB keys with all their research on it. It's like, oh, this is gonna be fun. So.
Yeah, that's good.
I want to talk about data culture real quick, because I think so the reason that teams have trouble organizing and managing the data isn't because they're lazy. It's because there's so many competing priorities and incentives. And this is the really, really interesting thing, is that when you start to go pre-IPO, the CSO wants to make all these mandates that everybody must use their data in XYZ ways. Then not only is that too late, it doesn't recognize the fact that you have to align the process of data collection with how scientists organize themselves and how they get their data work done. And that part is really, really critical, because here's the tricky thing about discovery. Discovery is like, 100 to 1. Here's what I'm trying to say. You're going to run 100 experiments. 6 months later, one of them is going to be useful. And it becomes very difficult emotionally and from a human perspective to treat all those data sets with the same discipline, because you're going to throw away so much of the work that you're doing. And so this is what I just wanted to, again, there's two things I want to emphasize here. So one, the usability of the system is really, really critical. And this is a lot of things that growing biotechs don't do, is they have all the technical know-how in-house, but they don't go and interview the bench scientists and say, hey, how can we make this as easy as humanly possible for you? So that, this is the key, if they do the lazy thing, the system still works. And that's a lot of because that's what we can expect people to do. Come on, they're this deep in 96 well plates, right? And trying to run all the experiments and then trying to also file the data. It's a huge pain in the behind. And so our job really as the infrastructure team is to make that as easy as humanly possible. So again, if people do the lazy thing, it's going to organize itself to some extent. And there's one more thing which really parties on what Jim was talking about, how not only in the siloing process and the copying process of data, in the world of data governance, we call this the uniqueness property. And what it's so strange that obviously all the work that we do here is technical, but the human word that comes up over and over again with data is trust. And the reason that teams have so much trouble trusting their data is that there are umpteen copies of it all over the place. And so when you get to data uniqueness, the team starts to gel and you get confidence in your I&D filings when you can point to something and say, that is the one thing that we're all talking about. You have a common frame of reference for data. And this is, again, using some of the technology that Amazon S3 has, building this concept of versioning for data sets. So there's this immutable entity and you can point to and say, this is the one thing, we're all talking about the same thing. Now let's have a discussion.
You've got so many phrases that I think are genius, Aneesh. I keep writing them down and planning on using them, but using them with credit as I go forward. Like the uniqueness property, I love that. It makes so much sense and puts this whole that whole concept of trust and in a really good light. So kudos to you for some really compelling terminology. So now that you've had a chance to take a breath from the ad answer, I want to come back to you with one more question. And so this is, so lab scientists and data scientists are using different tools. How should life sciences companies think about getting all these tools to work together?
Yeah, I think of S3 as, so let's think about, we're all using Mac or Windows or something like that. I think of S3 as kind of like it's the hard drive for your machine. And the data scientists and data engineers know how to use that hard drive, but there needs to be a finder for that, right? So the finder is the piece that, hey, well, in the Mac world or Windows Explorer, I think they call it, right? So what is the top level user interface that you go into? And so I again come back to the trick to breaking silos, which I think is really the soul of your question, Gary, is to making sure that everybody's using, be careful with this word, it's just a metaphor, the same hard drive. So you want everyone to be piling up all their data in the same cloud piece. And I think S3 is that core. And the second thing you want to do is you want to have this finder interface so that everybody is looking at and talking about the same thing. And remember what Jim was saying earlier about you have experiments chained with analyses, chained with filings, chained with more analyses. And so think about your data only denormalizes more over time or gets spread out more and more over time. So the very first thing that we can do to start breaking some of these silos and to address the skill gap between people is to make sure that the entire team, and this is where we are in kind of the curve of cloud adoption, make sure that the entire team has a window onto the cloud so that, again, this is it's an oversimplification so that data science and bench science are looking at the same thing. And it's only an oversimplification because there's also IT, there's also data engineering, but your developers and non-developers should be looking at the same data entities. The entity should be an S3 blob storage. So that's really a uniqueness thing, again, if you see it, right? Because if there's some data in Box and some data on the NAS and some data in S3, it's going to be very difficult to know which of those copies to trust, number one, and very difficult to tell this story. Right, this data lineage story, which Jim was kind of getting into, so, right? You want to know this analysis came from these data points, and we can trust it for this reason.
Fantastic, good stuff. Okay, so Aaron, question back to you. So, you're getting deep, working day to day with customer environments. Can you provide just some examples of work that we've done to help some of the data scientists get to actionable data faster?
Absolutely. So as I was describing earlier, we use the AWS storage gateway either virtually or sometimes we will put a physical appliance in there. We also work with a lot of CROs, so writing either of those scenarios end up really backing up to an S3 bucket in some way, shape, or form, either leaving the bench directly to the storage gateway that's on-prem and then replicating out to S3, or a CRO delivering data through any one of the S3 tools, or even using Amazon transfer services to allow us to run an S3 bucket with SFTP. However you slice it, getting that data as quickly as possible back to that S3 bucket. And then we start to use things like Step or Lambda. So once that file is done writing to the bucket, it will click off, end of file triggers off an event, which we can then attach to and start to stand up an orchestration layer of how to conduct some experiment on that data set. So we'll trigger that environment. Sometimes we'll stand up a whole HPC environment using pcluster or batch or whichever the customer feels comfortable using. conduct that work, and then at the end of that, write it back into that either that same bucket or a bucket that's adjacent to it. And to go back to what the Quilt team is heading for with their data culture, which is the one I'm stealing from you, creating that environment. Now you have both. You have the origin data that was the lead part of that experiment, and you also have the results in there for as long as you need it, and for you to then process in however you need to. So if you ever need to repeat that experiment, you always have that original data. But that's really where we help focus. As I was describing earlier, we're here to help enable scientists execute on what they do well by providing them really robust infrastructure that lowers the bar of entry as much as possible. Instead of having to have that person I was joking about earlier with a shoebox full of USB keys go off, plug it into an environment, plug it into their laptop, copy the data down, know how to start up Docker, go to run some experiment, let their laptop catch on fire because the thing's been running all weekend on some hard GPU process, take that data, collate it, and then email it out to a colleague or put it into a file share. That's just not sustainable work. So by getting that workflow that will take something quite literally we have customers that will run something on their bench, it will automatically load up to the storage gateway, and it will automatically kick off that compute cluster, putting it back into an S3 bucket for somebody to take a look at Monday morning. That's the type of thing that we help build for our customers.
Awesome, good stuff. So we do have a question that just popped up that I think is really relevant, and so this is kind of directed to Aaron and Aneesh, but thoughts on how potentially integrate Ignite with Quilt. And so the secondary part of that is Ignite finally has tagging capabilities, but there are a number of shortcomings. Tags can't be hidden from users, they can't be inherited from parent folders, etc. How can Quilt help overcome these limitations without the need to eliminate Ignite from our environment? I know we're kind of putting you on the spot, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I love that. Yeah, go ahead, Aaron.
I was just saying, you removed my answer by saying I can't eliminate Ignite.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so, well, I guess the first thing I want to acknowledge is that multiple systems are going to exist for a long period of time. And it's unrealistic to go to customers who already have workflows in place and say, hey, rip out all these things. So I think everybody's going to be of the mind that we don't want teams to it's very expensive to move people's cheese from behavioral standpoint as well, right? And scientists don't like that. So I think what the work that's pending here, and again, there are no easy answers because permissions become very tricky, but the work that's pending is really the same way all roads lead to Rome. You want all of your data to ultimately lead to S3. And so the ingest point may be Ignite, and we can use things like FSX, we can use things like Storage Gateway, we can use things like Data Sync, which are all AWS tool sets, to kind of take that data and lift it in the cloud where it has a better chance at being discoverable and being reproducible. And so I think the short of everything is to keep Ignite as an ingest point, but there's some R&D, and Aaron and his team are really expert at this piece in how that actually drains out into S3 and how we maintain some of the metadata properties, which Rodney is asking about around tags and such.
Yeah. And to give my more serious answer, once that data is in S3, we can learn from how data was either received or what it's shaped like when it lands on S3. And we can apply programmatic tagging policies either natively through Amazon's tagging policy, which is literally just you just describe what you want things to end up with for tags, or if you need to have analysis on that, as I was describing earlier about how we can kick off a high performance compute cluster from a file being written in S3, we can also go and analyze that file, go look at some headers, go look at some aspects of that data, and come up with a rule set using Lambda, which is just essentially on-demand scripting. No compute needed, all serverless. Open up that file, take a look at it, figure out what's inside of it, maybe get some metadata from when it was transmitted and what folder it was in, or additional data that was wrapped around that from the origin, and then create the tagging policy for it as it has landed in S3. And these are things you set once, you forget about it, and you let it run and just update as you need to.
I do also. So apologies for interrupting you there. And I think it's useful to separate collection from curation. And so one of the things that many of our customers do with respect to instrument data, and I see no reason why data from Ignite couldn't be different, is that sure, the instruments are generating the data. It may even go through an AS process, then through storage gateway into S3, right? But the curation actually happens after the data lands in S3. And let me explain what that looks like. So first of all the data collection happens, all the data comes in. But I think where Rodney is going with this is that, okay, so these tagging capabilities are going to be a shadow of what you can do in the world of S3, right? And so what you can do is, again, continue to use Ignite for ingest, and then you can use things like the Quilt user interface, this finder idea for S3, to say, okay, I want you to take these entities, and they can be really large entities. I want you to take these instrument entities, I want you to take these Ignite entities, and I want to encapsulate those and make something out of those. So I think there are a lot of strategies, and we know, Rodney, as well, we don't want to stress anybody out. Let's keep Ignite, let's make life easy for people. And the other thing is compliance, right? There's usually a lot of compliance processes that are in place around Ignite, and you have validated storage solutions, GXP validated, and so forth. The other thing, which I do want to say long-term though, I think, and this is our vision for the industry, eventually it will become unsustainable to send your data to other people's clouds. And we do think, I think in the 36-month, like in the time frame, that eventually S3 will eat all of the document stores. Because what companies will ultimately say to themselves, wait, I don't want to send data to other people's cloud, which is what you're doing with a Box or a Dropbox, number one. Number two, from a modeling standpoint, when your data is in Box or any other cloud store, it's a dead end because I can't run all the limitless compute that I have in S3 on that. So again, keep Ignite, let's use that as an entry point to S3. But long term, I do think that S3 is that's going to be checkmate because that's where all the compute is. And data has become so large that now you move compute to data, and it's impossible to do the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Just a little more on top of that. S3 has been around since the 2006. I think it was the first service that really came out, and it's just been consuming as you go along. And I completely agree. It's just getting tighter and tighter with things like multi-region replication that they now have. So the ability to ensure that you always have immediate access to that data in multiple regions in case of a failure. Your business continuity side of things, it's absolutely crushing anybody else along the way. But really the point I wanted to add in was you can always have a system of record. You can always have a system of note, but you having a system of authority, that's really where I try to push the data to is S3 is the system of authority. It's if you want to go get the one real truth, you can have multiple places that will answer the truth. But if you ever need to go back to the core, absolute, the atomic level of data, which one is the most accurate and the most resilient? That's where S3 sits.
I remember a couple summers ago, Aaron, when we talked to Eric Zimmerman, and he talked about moving from science fiction to science fact. And that was that whole systems of authority. I enjoyed that one as well. See, I take notes of these things, use them up. So, and there's Eric. Anyway, so see, I gave credit where credit was due. I will always do that. I do want to ask the team for some parting shots. But before I do, again, just a little bit of housekeeping cleanup. So again, to the attendees that have been here with us, thank you so much. Really appreciate everybody's attention over this past 45 minutes or so. You'll be seeing the email that'll come out for us to go register for your Biotech Guru Go t-shirt. Hit us up on LinkedIn, do all those great things. Obviously, we're just scratching the surface here, and everybody's environment is going to be unique and require some specific discussion. So if you don't know who your account manager or PTP is and you want to reach out, you can hit us at just PTP info. You can go to ptp.cloud. One of us will reach out to you very quickly, and obviously we can enable this team if necessary or get to the right person. You want to have a more in-depth conversation on the AWS side, we'll bring in Jim. We want to get into the data management side, we'll bring in Aneesh and the Quilt team, et cetera. So anyway, just feel free to reach back out to us if there are some specific questions that you have that we didn't address today. So with that, just any parting thoughts, any comments, any things that I didn't ask that you guys feel like you wanted to just share with our attendees today before we close?
I think we might have a question from Johan before we go up to the panel.
Yeah, I want to touch that. I want to hit that one.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, So it's a $1 million question. So what he's talking about is instruments are connected to proprietary databases, or you may have a specialty database like CDD Vault, where you've got different cartridges, you're doing your chemical analysis. There's kind of two high-level options you have here. So the first is it is possible to scrape that data out of those databases, and Glue Crawler is pretty excellent at this. So you can point to a Postgres database, any kind of database really, and Glue Crawler will kind of take that data and put it at rest in S3. So that's your option number one. That's a little bit, when I say more expensive, I mean that does imply more copies. But again, once the data are in S3, it's very easy to encapsulate that and make it immutable and point to whatever the table set or the record set is that Glue Crawler is extracted from that database. The second option, which is a little lighter, but maybe a little less, so it's easier to do, but maybe a little less reliable, is that you can have, if there are sufficient unique IDs in that database, you can just collect references and say either, it's not as strong as a connection string, but you might have a query string, a query, or a unique ID set that you refer to and say, as part of when you're assembling your data set concept, you can have these entries or these GUIDs that refer out to the database. So it's a very important question. And I think that those are your two choices, pointers, or you can use Glue Crawler to extract the data. I'm a big fan of the second, just because then you have everything. You have Athena, you have Iceberg, and all the cool things you can do in S3, but it may not be practical for all people. Actually, third pattern is federation, right? So you can use Elasticsearch, and we do this in Quilt, to federate data out from other sources. So a classic example is an ELN like Benchling. Benchling already has their warehouse. It's actually a Postgres piece. And you can federate some of that content into Quilt so that it's then discoverable in a single place, but Benchling is still the source of truth for that metadata.
Absolutely. Thanks. And I'll jump quickly in on Rodney's question there. It's a short one. So if you just look for PTP in Amazon's marketplace, you'll see that we have one called the PTP Life Science Cloud Accelerator. Just go through, purchase that, follow along with the prompts as you go through that. There's a description there of all the services that we offer through that through the process. And since I'm still talking, and Gary knows I love to talk, I will just wrap up with Gary's closing comments. So what I really love to see an organization just shift and focus on. We have, be it a company that is just starting off and they thought they had some ideas, but after speaking to folks like that are sitting here on the panel and just getting introduced into the Amazon world is, and I know I've said it a few times, but just lowering that bar of entry, putting things in a common place, focusing on just getting your team to only have to take as few steps as possible to meet that goal that you really need them to for that long-term execution of your workflow. That's whatever you can do, just get them in, make it easy, and then partner up with people like PTP, like us at PTP, to make sure that it's secure and will continue to operate well for you.
Super.
Aaron,
Thanks, Aaron.
I'll hop in here with some parting comments. I think, number one, going back to what I said before, don't let your small team mask a big problem, right? Address this early, address it often, right? Understand where your data is and where it's going. And I think, to Aneesh's point as well, separate in your mind ingestion from curation. I think, that data doesn't have to just get to S3 in one way, or it doesn't have to go through one route, right? It's as long as it gets there, like you said, Aaron, because once it's there, then it can be curated, like Aneesh said, and that's where the insight is going to be generated from. So I thank you both for your comments on all of this. I learned a lot talking with you as well, and appreciate the time today.
Thought for the group, and it's really about the idea that data management is only maybe 30% a technology problem. It's 70% a human problem. And I've just posted, I'll have to send this to Gary. It looks like I'm not able to post it in the Q&A section. So I think what I want everyone to think about is, what are the data cultural procedures that we put in place that make it easy for scientists to do the right thing with their data, knowing that they're stretched for time. And that is the ultimate finesse. In other words, if you find yourself getting overwhelmed with, we need this technology, we need that other technology, or another huge failure mode, we're going to come in and hire a team to write a custom application for us. Those are enormous failure modes. What you really want to think about is, what is the user interface? What is the user experience around creating data sets in my organization? And how do I make that so easy that people can't fail? And that so easy part includes things like taking items out of Ignite, automatically syncing items from Ignite into S3. So again, think about the human dimensions of data management. That is the hard part. We've all got technology coming out of our ears, and God bless Amazon. Every year when I go to reInvent, there's 100 new products, right? Which is amazing. And that's really where the advantage of having a partner like PTP comes into place. It's our job to really to stay on top of all those things and make them simple for you. But again, it's the human aspects of data collection that you want to work on. And I love to work in a top-down manner. So you should ask yourself as an organization, what are the data collection experiences we want to support, and then work there. And that's going to be an instrument integration. It's going to be a bench science integration. It's going to be a data science integration. But all that stuff's going to land in S3, and you're halfway home when you get there.
Fantastic, good stuff. And one last reminder of that I didn't bring up at the beginning. We are planning another part to this session where we'll get into some additional detail down the road. So be on the lookout for that. Again, checking us out on the LinkedIn page is probably a great place to just be aware of future events coming up. So, and last thing, as I continue to reiterate, if there are questions that you have that you either want in a private setting or you want to get into more detail in a whiteboard session, virtual or otherwise, just let us know. And if you don't know who your account manager is or you don't have a direct contact, just go to ptp.cloud, or if you happen to know Aneesh or Jim, you can reach out to them as well. So thank you to Aneesh and Jim and Aaron. Really enjoyed the conversation today. To our attendees, thanks for taking time out of your busy schedules. We will plan on posting this video up and we'll share it out. We just have to go through some approval process to do things like that. So we'll do that. We'll edit it up and get it in a nice format. So if you want to share this discussion with teammates that weren't here today, we'll be on the lookout for that. With that, hope everyone has a great rest of your day, and thanks for taking the time with us all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Gary. Thanks,
Enjoyed
everyone.
it. Bye-bye.
Bye now.